Sunday, we talked about the traditional passage of Jesus in the wilderness being tempted by, and we use Luke's word, tempted by the devil. This week, I decided I wanted to preach, this is not in the lectionary for this week, but I decided I wanted to preach on this passage, which is the story of the Gerasene demoniac. Go ahead, say that 5 times. Gerasene demoniac. Also called the Gadarene demoniac. Nobody's really sure where this is. Gerasa or Gadara. But Luke says it's in Gerasa. Beginning with verse 26 of chapter 8. Then they arrived at the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. As Jesus stepped out on land, a man of the city who had demons met him. For a long time he had worn no clothes, and he did not live in a house, but in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he fell down before him and shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For Jesus had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. Parentheses. For many times it had seized him. He was kept under guard and bound with chains and shackles, but he would break the bonds and be driven by the demon into the wilds. End parentheses. Jesus then asked him, "What is your name?" He said, "Legion," for many demons had entered him. They begged him not to order them to go back into the abyss. Now, there on the hillside was a large herd of swine that were feeding, and the demons begged Jesus to let them enter these. So Jesus gave them permission. Then the demons came out of the man and entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. When the swineherd saw what had happened, they ran off and told it in the city and in the country. And then people came out to see what had happened. And when they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. Those who had seen it told them how the one who had been possessed by demons had been healed. Then all of the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them, for they were seized with great fear. So he got into the boat and he returned. The man from whom the demons had gone begged that he might be with him, that he might be able to go with Jesus. But Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your home and declare how much God has done for you." And so he went away, proclaiming throughout the city how much Jesus had done for him. Thus ends the reading of the word. Well, first and foremost, this story is obviously very complex. Matthew tells the story and Mark tells the story. This is Luke's version of the story, and it's kind of like all jumbled. But it's complex. It has lots of disturbing visual effects. One of the reasons that I chose this for the bulletin cover. There are lots of elements to the story, and there are lots of characters in the story, and none of them is anyone we are particularly eager to identify with. You know, I always tell you to identify with somebody, anybody but not Jesus. Well, so in this story you have your pick. The disciples are present, but they're in the background. The possessed Gerasene demoniac is another character. The swineherds are in the story, and then there's all the people of the town who are in the story. So let's look at Jesus and the disciples as the first set of characters. Jesus has brought his still new recruits, the disciples, to the other side. That is, to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. He brought them to the other side in more ways than one. Because they have just been through a horrific storm. The story that precedes this is the story of Jesus calming the sea. The disciples are still shaken. They're wondering who Jesus is, that he can affect nature, that he can still the storm at sea with just a word. Likely, all the disciples really want is a cup of coffee and a bagel when they get to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. And they're setting foot on Gentile soil. This is important. They're setting foot on Gentile soil. To them, it's like a foreign country, which it no doubt makes the disciples pretty nervous. It's likely that they speak some Greek, but they're more comfortable with their native tongue, which is Aramaic. And that is the language that they speak with one another most of the time. After their night at sea, it's a wonder they have any energy at all to try to communicate. But they're going to be good sports because they are still learning. They will figure out how to get by. Just as an example, when I go to Guatemala, and you all know I speak fluent Spanish, but where I work, most of the people that I'm taking care of don't speak Spanish. They speak Quiche. So I need a Spanish interpreter who speaks Quiche and Spanish to interpret for me. The next character is the Gerasene demoniac. The moment Jesus steps off the boat onto dry land, onto this Gentile soil, he is confronted by a naked, Gentile, wide-eyed, crazed individual. Not an ideal welcome, you might say, but interesting enough for the disciples, whose nerves are already frayed and rattled. The naked man is covered with filth, with broken chains dangling from his wrists and ankles. He is loud and he's crying out as he cowers on the ground. The voice that comes from within him is not crying out for help, however. The voice that is crying out from within him is calling Jesus by name, "You, the Son of the Most High God," and saying, "Leave me alone. Don't torment us. Don't send us back into the abyss from whence we came. What have you to do with us?" says the unclean spirit. And Luke, very awkwardly in his story, begins to explain the story. And he explains that from the moment Jesus stepped off the boat, from the very moment he first laid eyes on the man, Jesus has known exactly what was going on inside of the Gerasene Gentile. Jesus knew of the presence of the unclean spirit even before it spoke. And Jesus commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. The unclean spirit is a soldier in the devil's army. And this soldier in the devil's army knows Jesus, knows exactly who he is better than anybody else. The spirit begs Jesus to be allowed to enter into the swine that are feeding on the hillside. And for anybody who is from the other side of the Sea of Galilee, that sounds like a good thing, because they don't eat swine. Nobody asked the swine about it. Nobody asked the swine herds about it. But Jesus gives the demons permission to do exactly what they asked. So, according to Luke's account, of their own accord, with permission, the demons remove themselves from the Gerasene Gentile crazed man and go into the swine. What made them rush down the steep bank of the hill into the Sea of Galilee and drown is a mystery. Now the swineherds. Cattle rustling in the Old West was a hanging offense. The swineherds have witnessed this event, and in a moment in time they have been bankrupted by this interloper, this stranger from the other side of the lake. Doubtful, they have no insurance against such acts of God, as it were. That was very funny. They are a mix of frightened and angry men as they run away and tell their story to everyone they meet in the countryside and in the city. You know what this guy did? The folks from the town. When Luke tells us the people came up to see what had happened, we wonder if this is a mob of the townspeople or if it's the mayor of the city and the city council. Have they been recruited to go out and manage this disastrous situation? How will they deal with this man, this stranger who has just wreaked havoc on their economy and upset the balance of their lives? Until this very moment in time, the Gerasene Gentile demoniac has been, for them, a convenient scapegoat. He could be blamed for just about anything that went wrong in the city or the countryside. After all, he was possessed of 6,000 evil demons. He was mad as a hatter. He could be blamed for the missing hot dogs that disappeared regularly from the 7-Eleven. It was just easier to conclude that the demoniac had done it, probably because he was hungry. No one else had a need, not any widows or orphans who were being ignored. Certainly they wouldn't dare to do something so wanton. When the swings in the playground were broken, when car windows were shattered in the night and mailboxes toppled over and destroyed, when the milk delivered by the milkman went missing, when the garden shears and the lawnmower disappeared from the garage, it was the demoniac who had taken them. No one individual would go out to the tombs in search of their lawnmower or their garden shears. Well, because the demoniac was naked, and he was dirty, and he was quite frankly scary. Whenever it was necessary to confront him, a gang came. And since he had taken up residence in the graveyard, well, they left him alone. After all, he was only hurting himself, and didn't know any better because he was quite literally out of his mind. When the designated gang had managed to corner him and chain him up so he wouldn't invade their lives and wreak havoc, he broke the bonds and continued to terrorize people with his madness. He was the town's own demoniac, known about by everyone. From birth, children learned about the demoniac and were warned to steer clear. Sometimes the teenagers went out to the graveyard to watch him, and sometimes they threw rocks at him to tease him and make him even conduct more bizarre behavior. Yes, he was a demoniac, but he was their demoniac. He was a known quantity, and he had become predictable. When Jesus came, he upset the balance of things. He created economic havoc for the swineherds, the butcher who sold the ham, and the people who had bacon every day for breakfast. When the representatives or the designated gang came out to investigate and saw that their madman wasn't mad anymore, the townspeople got nervous. Well, more than nervous, they got frightened, they got angry. They had to admit when they saw the man that he had been released from his tormentors and was in his right mind, that he could no longer be their demon-possessed patsy. He could no longer be their scapegoat. Something more powerful than evil, more powerful than the demonic spirits, someone most powerful, authoritative, and unexplainable had invaded their lives. They recognized this, and they were their shore and turned what they deemed their manageable, controllable, predictable lives, their world, upside down. They had evil under control. They had evil bottled up in this one man, manageable. They knew where evil lived, and they devoted considerable time and expense into seeing that it stayed isolated from the community. They had come to believe that they had some control over the source of evil. Fred Craddock asserts that this partially successful balance of tolerance and management of the demonic among the people allowed them to keep attention off their own lives. But now the power of God for good has come to their community. It has disturbed a way of life that they had come to accept. The community apple cart has been upset, and the people have had to disrupt their routine to pick up the bruised and broken apples that once symbolized order in their lives. Even when it is for good, power that can neither be calculated nor managed is frightening. They have already asked themselves with some degree of dread, what will God do next in our community? The people of the community ask Jesus to leave, as if somehow this will put everything back the way it was, but it won't. They no longer have their demoniac. They no longer have this other to focus attention upon. They no longer have this other to be the vessel where the evil spirits are contained and managed. He is gone. Will they find another? How will they restore order and put things right again now that Jesus has upset the state of tolerance that they have come to embrace as normal? The Gerasene Gentile man, now in his right mind, witnessed the power of God in Jesus. He didn't know exactly how to articulate that. He didn't know to attribute his healing to the one God of the Hebrew people. He's able only to speak of his experience with Jesus as a worker of wonders, a miracle man, a healer, one who can cast out demons. Let us remember that the power and the authority to do these things, to release this man from his bondage, comes to the anointed one from God. The Spirit of the Lord is upon Jesus, for God has anointed him to preach good news to the poor and to proclaim release to the captives. Here is the captive, released publicly by the love of God. Yet not one of the Gerasene community can fathom or understand that, including the poor demoniac. Everything that Jesus does points to God, not himself. How are we to understand this story in our lives and in the life of the church? The story tells us that the presence of Jesus is one of life's, the one that changes everything in our lives. It upsets our routine. It upsets the balance we have come to embrace between tolerance and managing crises. When we are so changed, our relationships change. Everything around us is changed. The Gerasene man, now in his right mind, has either a life to try and return to or a life to begin over again from scratch as a new man, a witness to how he has been changed. He took Jesus' challenge to tell his story and went into the city proclaiming what Jesus had done for him. Do you think people listened? Do you think people wanted to hear? Do you think people actually wanted to hear and be changed by his story? For him, it was an ending and and the beginning. He was released from bondage by the love of God, a love he had never known before. Our call during this season of Lent, and as those who call ourselves followers of Jesus, is not to be those who stand in the background. Our call is not to be those who go out to Jesus and say, please, leave, because you've upset everything. Our call is to learn how we can be changed and that there is good news. No matter what happens, there is good